When this zoologist saved a pregnant tiger in need and afterward released her back into her natural habitat, she feared what the future had in store for the mother and cub. 4 years later, she was shocked to see that same cub in the wilderness. Pamela was a respected zoologist and veterinarian by trade. As a very accomplished scientist, others in her field often revered her. She was a partner in the zoo she worked at and often led exhibitions in the local surrounding jungles. She would take science students with her to observe animals in their natural habitats here. She tried to do this at least 3 times a year. It was beneficial to the students and a great way for her to get out and interact with the wild habitats around her. If it weren't for these planned trips, she might never leave the comfort of her zoo, where all her animals were well taken care of. People flocked from all over the city to see the collection of animals. They had at least 90% of the animals they housed as rescued from some establishment or situation that required giving them a second chance at life. Pamela was incredibly passionate about that, so it only made sense when she came back to the zoo one day with a wild tiger in tow. That day, she was at an exhibition when something truly bizarre happened. It was a routine adventure, just like all those before. Pamela met with her group of students, and they set off into the deep layers of the jungle around them. They had a list of animals they were looking to observe. They were mostly herbivores, with a few small predators to look out for. Nothing on their list led them to believe that they would be crossing paths with one of nature's most deadly predators the jungle had to harbor, a fully grown tiger. It happened when they were least expecting it. The group had been hiking for about an hour when they heard a loud rustling behind them. Startled, they turned around to see the giant cat lurking behind them. Now, of course, they just wanted to scream, but Pamela cautioned them not to. She reacted instantly. She put herself in between her students and the tiger and tried to assess the situation. It took her just a few minutes to notice that something was off with the predator. It seemed highly disoriented and uncomfortable. Pamela couldn't help but feel like it looked at her like it needed help. It was right then and there that it collapsed in front of her. It took Pamela a good minute to process what was happening. One of the most prized and revered predators had just collapsed before her eyes. She knew that she needed to do something quickly. She rushed over to the tiger to see if it was still alive. Thankfully, it was. She then immediately phoned her team back at the zoo and told them to bring the van to collect the tiger and the students. She was going to take the animal back to her zoo. Now, of course, when she came back with a group of bewildered students and an unconscious tiger, her colleagues couldn't help but feel astounded. But they kicked themselves straight into action and began to help Pamela as best they could. She did some quick blood tests on the tiger and then found out that the poor cat was, in fact, affected by a bacteria that caused her to become severely dehydrated. This simply meant that if it hadn't been for them crossing the cat's path, it would have passed away. But that wasn't the only thing. They discovered this tiger was pregnant. This, of course, added extra concern. They checked the fetus of the tiger and found that it was fairly healthy, despite its mother's infection. They were so relieved now. All they needed to do was help the tiger get better and then prepare for the birth. They decided to house the wild tiger in an extra enclosure where they could treat her for her infection. That way, she could be safe and closely monitored. Their best intention was to nurse her back to health so that they could release her into her natural habitat before the birth of her cub. There, she could continue with her life as she had before she got sick and deliver her baby the way nature had planned. It was a great idea. However, they didn't reasonably anticipate the tiger going into labor earlier than expected. The sick tiger had barely been with them for a week when she started to show signs of early labor. This meant she wasn't going anywhere until she had her baby. They thought the only thing stopping the cub from becoming accustomed to being in captivity would be to let them both loose into the jungle soon after the delivery. It was the best plan they could come up with. The tiger paced her enclosure for hours before Pamela realized that something wasn't right. At this point, the tiger should have entered active labor. Instead, she was going into distress. She needed assistance. Pamela suited up with some team members and they entered the enclosure. They had to sedate the distressed tigress to get close to her. When she fell asleep, they went to work straight away. They found that the tiger cub was unusually large and was positioned awkwardly, hence the trouble delivering. But thanks to the help of Pamela and her team, they were able to deliver the big, healthy cub. And they also took care of Mom to ensure that she was all right. Everyone was in awe at the sight of the tiger cub. He was huge and unusually colored. Instead of a bright orange color, he was a pale yellow with faint stripes. Pamela was unsure what to think about it, but was still happy to see it breathing independently. The staff called the cub Hercules in honor of its surprising size. After the birth, they raced to get the pair healthy enough to return to nature. Pamela distanced herself in an effort to stay unattached. She knew it would be hard to say goodbye if she developed a close bond with the pair. Once they passed their health checks, the team took mother and son back to the jungle and released them deep within the leafy green foliage. Pamela felt a loss that day, but prayed for both of them to be okay. It was a tough world out there, and she wasn't sure they were truly ready to be back in the wilderness, but nature has its own set of rules, and Pamela had to respect that. It wasn't until years later that she made a discovery that simply shocked her beyond belief. It had been around 4 years since she and her team had helped the beautiful tiger. She thought of her often, especially when she went on trips to the jungle with her students. After the news of that adventure with the tiger had gotten out, loads more students decided they wanted to join her tours. Her group had almost tripled in numbers. On one particular trip, she went out with a large group. The weather hadn't been so great lately. There had been lots of rain, and the usual humidity made the jungle even foggier. This challenged their visibility in the wilderness, preventing the group from seeing much. Eventually, it got to the point where they needed to turn back, because going any further was just going to prove pointless. And that's when they caught a glimpse of something that no one ever expected to see. A student saw it first and brought it to Pamela's attention. What she initially thought to be a glimpse of light-skinned monkeys on the ground turned out to be something much more familiar. As they pursued the animal, they broke through some bushes, allowing them to see the full sight of what sat in front of them. There was a giant, light-skinned cat with faint stripes on its fur. Beside him was a normal-sized and colored tiger. Pamela recognized them instantly. They were the tigress and cub that she had cared for 4 years earlier. After all this time, they were still a healthy pair, thriving in the jungle. Her students could hardly get over what they were seeing. The tiger was unusually large and not commonly colored. He was extremely special, a sight that one would see only once in a lifetime. Pamela's heart was warm. She felt so good that she had been able to help such beautiful animals get a second chance at life, and couldn't wait to see where life would take them in the future.